Hey, I know you guys love the Miami Dolphins, and so do I. We're in the midst of our off-season meetings here, and the bosses told me, Riepma, how come nobody ever likes your videos? And I said Dolphins fans are the best, but they got to prove it. Like this video. If we don't get to 1,000 likes, I am toast. I just heard it from the bosses less than a half hour ago, so help me out. Like the video. I know you love the content. We got a lot to get into today on this edition of Dolphins Today. All right, it's time for another edition of Dolphins Today. Happy to have you along. Buckle up, dial it in, because we've got a lot to talk about on the roster front and some very interesting developments already in a short amount of time. My name is Jake Riepma. I am your host of Dolphins Today. And let's begin with the discussion at the cornerback position, because as I mentioned, the Dolphins wasted no time to make some roster moves, signing Ethan Bonner, among several other players, to future contracts. And I think Ethan Bonner is the most intriguing person to evaluate from a entire team perspective, because at that position, we saw him contribute down the stretch as a backup corner role and even played quite a bit in that wild card game against the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, again, this isn't groundbreaking stuff. Based on the way Ethan Bonner performed down the stretch, you thought he would get a future contract. 6'1", 186-pound corner out of Stanford, 4-year letter winner. And if you watch Hard Knocks, you saw Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and Raheem Mostert, who are widely regarded as the fastest players on the Dolphins roster, talk about Ethan Bonner as just a straight speedster, and interesting perspective given from the other side of the football as the cornerback position. And obviously, so important for the corner to have some speed. And when you look at what happened to this cornerback depth chart down the stretch, guys like Xavier Howard, who missed the last 3 games, well, played a series in Baltimore before getting hurt. Cater Coe, who struggled a little bit at that nickel corner position against Buffalo, didn't play particularly well against Kansas City as well. And then obviously Jalen Ramsey, a premier corner in the league. But notice behind Jalen Ramsey, Ethan Bonner jumped Cam Smith. And I think there's a lot to be concerned about when you bring up Cam Smith's name, and on the same token, when you're talking about Ethan Bonner. So on one side of the coin, yeah, Ethan Bonner earned himself a future contract and contributed to this Miami Dolphins team, even forced a fumble in that game against the Chiefs. But how about Cam Smith? This is a second-round pick we're talking about, and an undrafted free agent out of Stanford, and Ethan Bonner has elevated his level of play past the second-round pick. And I got to admit, I'll always be honest with you, I'm worried Cam Smith might be a bust. Now, relax, Riepma, pump the brakes. It's only one season. It's his rookie year. But again, this is a guy that was invested in as the Dolphins' first pick of that year, because remember, they didn't have a first-round pick. So you're telling me the first guy taken off the draft board last year in 2023 contributes 2 tackles in garbage time and played a little bit on special teams, but as we talked about in one of our previous videos, the Dolphins' special teams were arguably the worst in the NFL. And so when you look at Cam Smith under a microscope, what is this guy contributing? Is he a bust? And my concern has reached a maximum, but I want to hear from you. Let me know down in the comments. What's your concern level with Cam Smith? And again, when you're taken second in the second round, and for the Dolphins, that first pick that they had last year, that comes with high expectations. You have to contribute. You have to perform. And the first year for Cam Smith, my oh my, just a failing grade in all aspects. Now, coming up, we're going to talk about why Cam Smith might not have fit into Vic Fangio's system, and if there is a path forward for the second-round pick out of South Carolina. But first, I got to give a huge shout-out to today's presenting sponsor, and if you follow the channel, you know Factor is America's #1 meal delivery service, and they check every single box. I'm telling you, it's a win-win-win any way you slice it. The convenience, the quality, the delicious taste. How about that? The Chipotle pork chop, I tell you what, when you try it, your taste buds are going to be screaming with joy. And oh, by the way, as we turn the calendar into 2024, Factor is here to help you with those New Year's resolutions, because all of these meals are chef approved, dietitian approved, chef prepared, and some of the most delicious foods that you'll ever take. And by the way, only 2 minutes to heat up. The convenience is there. Tons of different options like keto, calorie smart, vegan, veggie, so much more. And oh yeah, don't forget about the 35 meals to choose from per week, so you can always keep it fresh, as well as 55 weekly add-ons. Some of their smoothies, I'm telling you what, they are delicious, especially in the morning when you're on the go. I love the mango one as well. So don't take my word for it. Head to factormeals.com/FinzChat50 and use that code FinzChat50 to get 50% off. If I said that a little too fast, I'll slow it down for you. And oh yeah, by the way, we love you and we care about you, so we'll put that link right in the chat. It's factormeals.com/FinzChat50 and use that code FinzChat50 for 50% off. Now, Cam Smith, second round pick, zero production. You can't have it. You just can't have that. And I don't want this to sound like I'm coming down on Cam Smith, because it's nothing personal, but I think this coaching staff has been relatively gentle with Cam Smith, and Mike McDaniel said as much in some comments leading up to the wild card game against the Kansas City Chiefs, where he said, corners to me are kind of like quarterbacks in that you have to be careful. You have to put them in positions where they're not going to have results that create scar tissue. And I said this on one of the shows earlier, but it's worth repeating that to me just sounds like babying a player that simply wasn't ready to play, that simply didn't have the abilities to help the team win from the cornerback position. And again, this is a second-round pick we're talking about. This isn't Ethan Bonner, who was undrafted and now all of a sudden contributing. No, this is the guy you invested in out of South Carolina, Cam Smith, and expected to contribute to the secondary. And while Mike McDaniel was gentle, how about the comments from the defensive coordinator, Vic Fangio? And again, this was before the game against the Kansas City Chiefs in that wild card. So a little bit, about a week old, but still, I think it carries a lot of weight, because Vic Fangio was asked about Cam Smith and how he can improve. And you got to love the way Vic Fangio put it. Didn't really leave much to the imagination. He said, improve in all areas: assignment, technique, execution, know-how. End quote. And that kind of hits you in the face. If I'm Cam Smith and I read that, I'm saying, oh boy, my defensive coordinator thinks very, very little of me. Now, there's two different directions this can take if you're Cam Smith. You can use it as fuel in the offseason to, again, be able to improve in all of those areas that Vic Fangio mentioned, or you can sulk and eventually turn into that B word that we talk about, a bust. But the bottom line is, if you're the Dolphins organization, you have to use this as a lesson as we approach the upcoming draft. You can't miss on early round picks. And as we look at the draft board for 2024, you see round number 1, 21st overall. The Dolphins have a first round pick for the first time in 3 years. And you circle that one in red pen if you're Chris Grier, and you say, we can't miss here. We have to find a meaningful, impactful player at that position. And the same can be said for rounds 1 through, I'll even say rounds 1 through 5. All the rosters across the NFL have examples of contributors from those rounds into the middle rounds. And then, oh yeah, by the way, let's try to hit on some day 3 picks as well. And when I look at that first round pick and you look at where this team is at right now, the conversation continues to go about what's the position of need, right? And that's the same for any NFL franchise. You try to find that perfect little formula between area of need, best player available, value in the pick, and so on and so forth. And don't worry, we're going to be talking about the draft all the time leading up to the NFL draft. That's why you subscribe. Make sure you do. You don't want to miss anything. But when I look at this Dolphins roster, I think it's the offensive line. When you combine the fact that this offensive line was a revolving door because of injuries, but also with the fact that they weren't that deep as a position group to begin with, it certainly is an area to look under a microscope heading into the draft, because I think there's a lot of talented prospects in that first round from the offensive line position. Let's talk about one in particular. Jackson Powers Johnson, arguably the most athletic offensive lineman in this draft. And I think that fits Mike McDaniel's scheme very well. You look at some of those highlight reel plays against the Denver Broncos, and guys like Austin Jackson, Teron Armstead, they are 10, 15 yards downfield in some of those big running plays. So if you can find athletic offensive linemen, I think that fits what the Miami Dolphins are trying to do on the offensive line front. And Jackson Powers Johnson is probably the one that fits that mold the best. And the Athletics' most recent mock draft, they had him going to Miami at 21 overall. So you'd like to think that Jackson Powers Johnson will be available at that 21st overall pick. Obviously, the Combine will tell us a lot more coming up here as well. But some other potential picks to keep your eye on. Amarius Mims out of Georgia, offensive lineman, intriguing prospect because he's only played 8 games. He's only started 8 games for the Georgia Bulldogs, so not a ton of sample size of experience. However, he fits the mold as an NFL offensive lineman. Tyler Guyton out of Oklahoma, another guy, big name program and somebody that's played a lot of meaningful snaps. And if you want to flip over the defensive line, I'm not opposed to that as well. And for our producer today, Jeffrey Cooperstein, we'll throw those horns up. Byron Murphy, the second out of Texas, tremendous player. And I think, in fact, when you look at what he was able to do in a Longhorns uniform, he fits that mold of a first-round pick on the defensive line. And maybe, I said earlier I'd love to see Christian Wilkins re-sign, but if that doesn't work out, maybe you go through the draft. Now, all that said, I want you to be the GM. Let me know in the comments what position should the Dolphins target in the first round. Do you want to stick on the offensive line like I mentioned? I think defensive line, there's an argument to be made. You could make the argument for linebacker, Jerome Baker, a pending free agent who was banged up at the end of the season. Maybe edge rusher. I don't have to remind anybody of the devastating injuries that the edge rushers faced this season for the Dolphins. And in today's NFL, you can never go wrong with talented edge rushers. All that said, let me know down in the comments. I love reading what everybody has to say because that's what makes Dolphins Today so fun. We've got a community of a number of followers that can have their voice heard. Now, if you made it to the end of the video, I reminded you at the beginning, I'm on the hot seat here at Chat Sports. You got to like the video if you love the Miami Dolphins, if you love the daily content, if you love the aqua and orange being covered from every single angle, like the video. It doesn't cost you anything. It's real simple. We got to get to 1,000 likes on this video or my ass is grass, as they say. But in all seriousness, thanks so much for tuning in. Shout out to producer Coop on the ones and twos. Always a pleasure to work with the one and only Jeffrey Cooperstein as we bring you the latest from Dolphins Today.